The 2024-25 Women's Super League season is over. Therefore, it's time for our season reviews. In these videos, we discuss how the teams competed compared to their expectations, what mitigating circumstances may have occurred during the season, and rate every club's campaign on a scale from 1 to 10. Now we're on to Brighton. Expectations were high on the South Coast after an ambitious transfer window and the appointment of Dario Vidosic. In the first half of the campaign, the Seagulls took the league by storm, but a steep drop-off in the back half of the season will be a cause for concern. This is our Brighton season review. So let's get into it then. It's our third season review from the last WSL campaign, and today we are on to Brighton, Harry. Brighton emerged very early on this campaign as the surprise package. It sort of fell away, but still an overwhelmingly positive campaign for them.
Yeah, I think so. As you say, it was a season where for the first half of the campaign, I thought they were going to win the league. And then
I was fully on board the Vidosic hype train.
And then I thought for the second half of the campaign, they were going to get relegated. So two very different forms, but they did finish best of the rest. And I think that you have to give them credit because as much as people will focus on the way they fell away towards the second half of the campaign, the first half was mightily impressive. They were so good to start the season. They picked up some brilliant results. They played teams off the park. They looked unstoppable. And I think that the drop-off was expected. The drop-off happens sometimes, when that new manager bounce rubs off and when people start to work out how you're going to play, you do end up dropping off a little bit until the manager works out an adaptation. And I think that the problem for Brighton was that adaptability never came from Vidosic. Usually, towards the end of the season, you do see something change, but we didn't see that. They got away with it this year. Something they need to look on next year, but to talk on this season, I think they were superb. They had a brilliant window and they capitalised on it. Unsurprisingly, bringing in players like Fran Kirby and Nikita Paris, and you play really well. So I think they were exceptional. We knew it from game week 1 when Kiko Seike scored 4 goals and they smashed Everton that they were in for a really good season. And I think they were just really enjoyable to watch, especially in that first half of the campaign, as I mentioned. They were just a really exciting football side to watch. And from a neutral point of view, I really enjoyed watching Brighton play because they played some lovely stuff and they, when other sides who want to sit deep and absorb pressure, Brighton want to get the ball around, they want to play football, they want to move it quickly and they want to score good goals.
Yeah, I think Brighton's a lovely culmination, and actually it's the ethos as a whole club rather than just the women's team, but they have a really nice ethos where it's a really exciting young manager in the form of Dario Vidosic, and then bringing in, and the recruitment was top-notch, really impressive, really ambitious recruitment, and a nice mixture of some older heads with a lot of younger players. I think that works quite nicely to bring those players through. And we've certainly seen players like Michelle Aguimang and Helena Kankovic really come into their own at the end of this season. So that's really, really positive. And obviously Poppy Patterson as well, but she won't be there next campaign. She'll leave on a free transfer, which is something Brighton need to address, is players leaving on free transfers. I think ultimately the second half of the season was just teams exposing the gaps that we saw there in the first half of the season. We did a video speaking about Brighton's excellent performances and analysing how they were playing tactically. And we said in that there does need to be, the caveat that they have problems in their team. There are issues there that need to be addressed. And there's a really good piece by David Astill in TFA looking at it about how there were issues in Brighton's rest defence, there were issues in how they were building up that teams just weren't taking advantage of. And often Brighton were relying on a really good pass to be able to play through the lines, and that isn't a very sustainable way of building up. And I think ultimately in the second half of the season, we saw those errors they were making at the back were being capitalised on more often because teams would press up higher against Brighton. So, I think there are issues there that need to be addressed. There are issues that, Dario Vidosic has now a few months to work on and look at how they want to play next season. I also think with stronger recruitment and centre-backs who look more comfortable in this sort of system, I think that will benefit them. A lot of people concerned by the departures they've had they're already going into this summer, but I actually think as much as there have been some quite key players like Maria Thorisdottir, I think you can get a centre-backs who are much more comfortable playing possession-based football. And I think bringing in younger players will suit that philosophy a lot more because they'd have been coached now by more professional standards and coached to play more possession-based football. So I think that'll be how Brighton look to go next season. Ultimately, a lot of their campaign next year will depend on how they recruit this summer. But looking back at the season they've had, really impressive stuff to start the season, and then sort of that natural drop-off that we would have expected, that you couldn't keep that overperformance. You couldn't sustain that for too long.
Yeah, 100%. As you say, they were overperforming to start with at the season. And I think that, again, we spoke about it with Villa yesterday, that new manager coming in, they had, I think in the final third, they got that recruiting spot on. For the way Vidosic wanted to play, the forward players they brought in to be high pressing and to be aggressive was superb. I thought Paris, Kirby, brilliant. Kankovic, brilliant. I think an underrated one is Madison Haley.
Paris is quite an interesting one for me. I'll let you talk about Haley in a second. Paris is quite an interesting one for me because I wonder how Brighton would have gone without her this campaign. They signed her very late in that window. And as much as Seika had a very good first game of the season, I really wonder how Brighton would have gone without Paris, because I think at times they did rely on her goals.
Yeah.
Haley, though, really impressive.
Yeah, I think that Haley is kind of the unsung hero in this Brighton side. People mention the household names that delivered the goals, but Haley's work rate was mightily impressive. I think one of her best games of the season was against Chelsea at home, where new to the league Naomi Girma looked really out of place because Haley was all over her like a rash. And I think that that's what you need when you've got those kind of household names and really good finishers and creators in Kirby and Paris. You need young energy in there who's going to run around and do the majority of the pressing. Obviously, Paris and Kirby can still run and press, but not to the same level that they used to be able to. So they supplemented it really well by bringing in these younger players, these younger talents like the Kankovic and Matt Haley, who just ran around and caused a lot of problems for our backlines. And I think that, we did see from Haley a few moments where I think that she is still a little bit raw and isn't quite at that top standard yet. But the fact she played a pretty strong season and played a lot of minutes, she'll look to build onto that next season, and she will improve. She already improved across the campaign. Michelle Aguilman's another one, but obviously she is alone, so she will return to Arsenal. But that was now a younger player who they brought in to bring some legs up there and to keep that high intensity press going.
Is there the opportunity of a permanent there if Arsenal aren't looking at giving her minutes next season?
If Arsenal want to sell her, Brighton should 100% be in that conversation, because I thought Aguilman, especially second half of the season, once Brighton picked up a few injuries and Aguilman was starting every single week, she looked comfortable. She's already scored for the Lionesses. She's already got a recall as well. So a player that is really progressing in the game. If Arsenal don't want her, I think Brighton have definitely got to be in the market.
I think it'd be less of a case of Arsenal wanting to sell, but if she's forcing that move, I think that's definitely an opportunity Brighton have to take. I think they've got to say to her, look, we want you for next season. See what Arsenal want. If they don't want to sign you, they're not going to give you minutes, then we'll sign you.
Yeah.
And make that sort of that connection there, but encourage her to force that move a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's review competitions then. WSL 5th place in terms of expectations for this season. I think it's fairly on par with what most pundits said going into this campaign, what most of the media said. I think it's fairly on par with what most people expected. Really, really strong recruitment. A lot of people thought they'd be the dark horses, and they were in the first half of the season.
Yeah, 100%. As we say, they are the best of the rest. I think that right now, the quality they've got in the squad with the manager they've got, they are the best of the rest in the WSL. Yeah, they were the dark horses. They were overperforming to start the season, but no one expected them to be finishing in the Champions League spaces or finishing ahead of any of the big four. So to finish 5th, it's still a very, very strong season. And I think that it's important to realise that despite the drop-off, finishing 5th is still exactly what they expected, and I think they'll be very, very happy with that.
What I will say is I think they were rather lucky to finish 5th.
Yes.
And, people were, and they deserved it because of their first half of the season form, but the way they fell off, in other seasons, teams would have taken advantage of that, and it just felt like they were helped out by the fact that teams like Villa, Liverpool, Everton were just taking points off each other constantly.
Yeah.
So they none of them really gained on Brighton. If any of them had put together a really consistent run, I know Villa did right at the end, but Villa came from 11th and finished 6th. That says it all really about how their bottom half of the table panned out. But I think Brighton were fortunate to finish 5th because their second half of the season was really poor.
Yeah, I think that if the likes of, because you say the teams that came on strong at the end of the season were Villa, were Leicester, and West Ham, and those lot were 9th, 10th, 11th. If Liverpool or Tottenham put on a good run from 6th, 7th, then suddenly Brighton would have got jumped. but because it was Liverpool also kind of fell away at the end of the season, and the teams towards the bottom picked up, Brighton kind of got away with it.
I had this phenomenon where different teams had little patches. Like Everton, straight after January with their new signings, were excellent. Then they were like, well, we're safe now, and they just took their foot off the gas.
Yeah.
Liverpool had a great run after Amber Whiteley was brought in, and then they, again, were safe, so it sort of fell off. And so it was only those teams that were in that 9th, 10th, 11th area, which then needed those points, that then came through the table. But yeah, I think I think Brighton 5th, fair positioning, and they met the expectations set for them this season. League Cup then, quarter-final stage, I think they'll be all right with that. I think they'll be annoyed about the way they lost to Arsenal, because that was quite an embarrassing loss, I thought. But I think they'll still be rather pleased with getting to the quarters. Getting out of the group stage is a good thing.
Yeah, those groups are really hard to get out of. Peter won't will underestimate it, but they are difficult groups to contend with. But Brighton, they were happy to get through, to come against. When you get to the quarterfinals, you're almost guaranteed to come up against one of the big four, so it was always going to be difficult for them. I think they'd like to do better, but they did okay, and I think that to get to the quarterfinals, they'll hope if they get there next year. I think that'll still be decent. If they can go deeper, that'd be phenomenal.
Yeah, and then FA Cup round of 16 stage. Again, I think there'll be a little bit of disappointment there. They lost to Aston Villa 3-2 in that game. They would have gone on to play Man City, which I think at the point in the season, I think that could have been a game they won. And then suddenly it's FA Cup semis. Yeah. So I think they'll be a little bit disappointed, but ultimately I don't think they'll take too much frustration away from this campaign.
Yeah, the reason the Cups did poorly as they were, because when those latter stages of the domestic cups come in the second half of the season, and that's when Brighton fell away.
Yeah.
If the cup games, not this will ever happen, but if the cup games had been in the first half of the season, Brighton would have probably gone on a brilliant run.
Or if Brighton had just kept their form up, they would have.
Which is what they need to do, because they're not going to move the FA Cup just for Brighton. Brighton need to be more consistent as well. They can't just do
won it all by Christmas.
They're just going to keep having really good the first half of the season and just be rubbish in the second half. But yeah, I think that if they can put together some consistency over the whole campaign, it won't only be the league that benefits, it will be those domestic competitions.
Yeah, it's the usual phenomenon. The new manager comes in, does something new, and it surprises the league, and then you just and that variance makes a difference, and then you just have the natural drop off back to normality. And so we saw Brighton, but I think what happened for Brighton was they started really high, and then they dropped and they went right down to the bottom of how they were playing. So there's a huge swing in the curve there. I don't think we'll see quite as a dramatic shift next season, but teams did figure them out this year. Next season, I think there'll be a lot more on, in that middle line where they'll probably, I think they could set, depending on how they recruit this summer, end up in a very similar place, or be contesting for that the 5th, 6th area. But that I think they'll have those results more gradually over the campaign rather than a flash at the start and a complete drop off at the end.
Yeah, I think that the pressure is now on Vidosic and Brighton to come up with something different, or obviously not completely different, but to adapt what they were doing, because you've got sides that no one's really worked out what Villa and Arroyo are doing. Liverpool, we don't really know what's going on with their manager situation, so they could have some new blood. Leicester, Amadine Mikel, that was not the way she wanted to play last season, and they
lost all their attackers. But they were very good defensively.
So I think there's pressure on Brighton now to get it right tactically, because if they try and play exactly the same as they have towards the end of the season, sides know how to beat that, and they will beat them. So pressure is on now Vidosic to come up with something going into next season. But I think the base idea that they brought in at the start of last season, the start of this campaign, was absolutely brilliant. And if they can adapt that slightly to be a little bit more unknown and to be a bit more difficult to play against, they could be in for another really good season.
But they finished 5th with 3 league wins after November.
That's incredible. That's brilliant. Like that
speaks to how good their start was. But what a complete fall apart in the second half of the campaign. So that's something they'll need to work on for next season. Key matches then. I think in terms of expectations, they met their expectations. Key matches, I picked out Brighton 4, Arsenal 2.
Yeah.
Quite an obvious one. Played very well in that game. And similarly, Brighton 2, Chelsea 2. Both in the second half of the season. But I think that showed that the quality's all still been there, and the ability to turn up for those big games still been there. They've just not really had the consistency.
Yeah, those 2 games were really good, especially the Arsenal one, were really good examples of how Brighton's drop off wasn't suddenly because they're rubbish, because it was I think it was really encouraging to still see signs of that quality. But as you say, Brighton this season have done so well against playing against the bigger sides. They've drawn to United, they've beaten Arsenal, they've drawn to Chelsea. They gave Chelsea that absolute classic of a game at Kings Meadow as well.
Yeah.
They've gone and got results against the biggest sides in the league, and I think that's what will frustrate them a little bit, is that it was actually their results against the bottom half that let them down, because they were really good against the big sides, but against the weaker opposition, they just didn't get it right, and I think that will really frustrate them, because, you know, I mean, obviously, when you go and beat the best sides in the league but can't beat the worst sides in the league, that's a really weird situation to be in, but they'll hope to rectify that next season.
Well, it's difficult because when you create space by baiting the press, it becomes very difficult to do that when the other team don't press.
Yeah.
So against those weaker sides who play a little deeper, who will just drop off rather than pushing up, you struggle then to create the space to then attack into. So Brighton were really struggling with that this season. Against teams like Chelsea and Arsenal, though, who do push up high, you can draw them in and then play around them and then use the space that's left in behind. What is noticeable, though, is that in both of those games, they still conceded 2 goals in each.
Yes.
So this next season, there's got to be a focus on how do they show up defensively, and you know, a lot of the time in these situations, you just point immediately to the goalkeeper. But Bagley was actually really good this year.
Yeah.
So I think a bit of a drop off came when Loek played second half of the season, but. I think overall Brighton structurally have got to improve defensively, but also personnel-wise, and have players who are more comfortable playing a heavy possession-based system.
Yeah, 100% defense, because again, they haven't got bad quality defenders in terms of, you know, good at clearances, good at tackling, and again, same with Bagley. Bagley's a brilliant shot stopper, but they need to find players that are better on the ball, and I think that's why we've seen Loek come in, because Vidosic viewed Loek better on the ball than Bagley is, and that puts you in a really difficult position, because I think we all know Bagley's the better goalkeeper, she's the better shot stopper, but if Loek's better on the ball, it puts you in a difficult position. So either you get Bagley to be better on the ball and you try and train that into her. You can't really get a goalkeeper better at shot stopping or reactions, that's kind of just built into them. Or you go and buy a whole new goalkeeper.
By Musovic.
Or you go buy... Well, she's back from pregnancy. But I think that
would be quite a key part, yeah.
Pregnant keeper in goal. It's not going to help anyone. But I think that, they need to get defensive options and a goalkeeper who are better on the ball and look more comfortable. Because if they've got players who can play under that pressure, and they stop giving... Half their goals this season, I believe, came from mistakes, errors leading to goal, and that is just can't happen. You can't pass it to your opposition in your own penalty area, and that was their problem. Is they got so bogged out when they were playing the ball. It wasn't even like they were losing it in their own half. It wasn't even like they were losing it on the edge of the area. There were times where they'd lose it in their own 18-yard box, and that you might as well give the opposition a goal at that point, because if you lose it there, they've got an immediate shooting opportunity. So they need to get better on the ball, or try and, it's not a great idea, but to remedy it, try and lose the ball first. If you're going to lose the ball, lose it further up the pitch. Because then at least you're giving it a tune.
It's the ball.
I know, but I'm saying worst comes to worst, if they don't get play it, with the players they've got, right, I think that's what the adaptation should have been in the second half of the season, with the players they've got, is to just try and get the ball higher, so you lose, if they are going to lose it, they lose it on the halfway line rather than losing it in their own penalty area. But I'm not a tactician, and that is a terrible idea. But for a quick fix, for a bodge job, as you'd call it. But yeah, Brighton...
Well, we saw Arsenal do it in the Champions League final. You play that ball over the top, you stretch the pitch, you bring your own team up a few yards.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how Brighton play. I think Vidosic has nice core principles, I think, in terms of wanting to play possession-based, wanting to play quickly through the lines, wanting to bring teams close to them with passing and open up space then to attack, and in that way generate those transitional moments when you isolate your attackers against the opposition backline, and then you can take them on like that. And I think often we saw, a lot of Brighton's goals this season came from those moments where, rather than them being penning a side in, like a lot of the top teams, possession-based teams do, they do it in a very different way. Similar to Liam Rossigna at Strasbourg men's side this season, where basically you play lots of passes around the back, you wait for a team to grow comfortable as trying to come onto you, grow frustrated, and you wait for them to make rash decisions with their pressing. That then opens up gaps you'd be able to play passes quickly through, and suddenly open up space to then go and attack into. And often you get either numerical overloads, or you've got the advantage of the fact your players are running towards goal and their players are running backwards. which naturally gives you an advantage when you've got 3-4 players rushing forwards. It's very difficult then to be able to, as a defensive players, account for all of that. So yeah, Brighton are really effective at doing that. They've just got to be more consistent with it next season, because the problem is that doesn't work every time, especially against teams who don't want to press up high, or especially against teams who are really good at pressing and don't get drawn in like that. You don't get those same advantages. So we saw Manchester United when they played them this season. Earlier in the campaign, they did quite well.
Yeah.
This later stage, when they played them late in the season, I think it was 3-0 United that game, because they are now a very good pressing team. So they've got to be careful of those two things, but I think next season will be very interesting to see how they adjust tactically and who they bring in the market. Because if they recruit like they did this summer, I'm very optimistic they'll do well next season. So should be interesting. Usually do a bit of a team assessment. Kankovic, every attacker did really well in different games this season at different spells. And I think in terms of what needs improvements, it's across the back line.
Yeah, 100%. I think that front line was absolutely formidable, and I think that the fact that I don't think we saw bits. I think the most consistent were the likes of Paris and Kirby, but then I think we saw what they did is they had loads of attackers who had good patches, but all at different times.
Sega had one game.
Sega was good to start the season, and then Kankovic came into really good form over periods. Madison Haley was the same. And then Paris had a really good run of form, but overall was pretty decent. Kirby the same, so they did really well to just have. Simmons was another one who just had a couple
Simmons
patches.
was good all season, to be fair. I think
that is
consistent.
true.
I think one player who was really disappointing this season was Bruno Villamayor. When she came in on loan, I thought this could be a game-changing signing, but we just never really saw that. And I don't know if it's because of the other players they brought in, because Paris came in and stuff like that. So she wasn't really given the same opportunity she would have been if that hadn't happened. But I was really disappointed with what we saw. I thought we'd see more from her this campaign.
Yeah.
Especially someone who I put her in my fantasy WSL team. She did nothing. Human. Especially as I had Kiko Sege in for game one and took her out.
Yeah.
Oh, human. Anyway, I think Brighton will push on hopefully next season. Depends what they do in the market.
Yeah.
Rating wise for this campaign, got to be fairly high, right?
Yeah. Do you know what I put Arsenal at 8. I put Aston Villa at a 6. So I'm going to put Brighton slam dunk in the middle of that and go 7. They were so they did fall off in the second half, but they were so good in the first half. It's still got to be pretty high.
Yeah, I'll be between a 7 and an 8. I'm going to say 7 as well. I think.
Fair enough.
I think if they'd won a few more games setting off the season, it would easily be an 8 or a 9, because it was really impressive in the first half. And actually, in terms of where we expect them to be, though, fairly in line with expectations, and by the end of the season. But right at the start, they were competing. I think if they'd kept that form up, they easily could have got 4th this season. So slightly disappointing in that regard. So I think a 7 is a fitting number. Which again, at the start, I think at the mid-season we give them a 10.
Yeah, I think we did. I think we did when we did that mid-season review. They were flawless.
I can't remember if we did numbers or grades. We might have given them, it was either a 10 or an A star they got.
That's the equivalent. That's how to translate. A star, it was 10. So there you go. But yeah, I think they were brilliant, Brighton, and I'm hoping that they're exciting, and that's what we want to see in the top level of football. We want to see exciting football. We want to see brave, bold styles. So hopefully they bring the same kind of football next season.
Hopefully so. That is everything for today's video, though. If you haven't already, go and check out our last 2. We spoke about Arsenal and Aston Villa. One of those will be on screen now. And look out for tomorrow's video where we'll be talking Chelsea as we continue to review season. That was everything from us today. Thank you guys for watching. If you have enjoyed, get involved in the comments below and give us your thoughts. But that's everything for today, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.